First class, honey, are you sure you have the right flight? The words dripped with a sickly, sweet condescension, the kind reserved for a stray dog that had wandered into a mansion. The gate agent didn't even look up from her screen, already dismissing the woman standing before her. She saw the simple black hoodie, the comfortable travel pants, and the woman's dark skin, and her mind filled in the rest of the story. A story that was entirely wrong. Little did she know she wasn't talking to a lost passenger. She was talking to the one person who could dismantle her entire world with a single quiet phone call. The fluorescent lights of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 8 hummed with a monotonous, oppressive energy. It was the sound of 1,000 hurried goodbyes and a million anxieties, all compressed into a space that smelled faintly of floor polish and Cinnabon. Dr. Elani Taylor stood patiently in the priority boarding line for American Airlines Flight 11, a cross-country journey to Los Angeles. She clutched her boarding pass, a simple slip of paper that represented 6 hours of anticipated comfort before a week of intense work. She wasn't dressed to impress. Her attire was tactical, a soft, nondescript black hoodie, comfortable joggers, and a pair of well-worn Brooks sneakers. A simple backpack held her laptop and a change of clothes. To the casual observer, she was just another traveler. To the discerning eye, she was someone who valued comfort over presentation for a long flight. To Karen Miller, the gate agent, with a severe blonde bob and a name tag pinned just a little too high on her chest, Elani was an anomaly that needed correcting. Elani reached the front of the line and placed her boarding pass on the scanner. A cheerful chime was meant to follow. Instead, a harsh, discordant beep echoed through the tense quiet of the boarding area. Karen Miller, without looking up, sighed with theatrical impatience. "Next," she barked. "Excuse me," Elani said, her voice calm and even. "There seems to be an issue with my ticket." Karen finally lifted her eyes, her gaze sweeping over Elani from head to toe in a fraction of a second. It was a practiced, dismissive appraisal. Disdain flickered in her pale blue eyes before being replaced by a mask of professional apathy. "Let me see," Karen said, snatching the boarding pass from Elani's hand. She stared at it, her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. The name read, Dr. A. Taylor. The seat assignment was 2B first class. Karen let out a short, sharp laugh that was more of a scoff. That's when she delivered the line loud enough for the next few people in line to hear. "First class, honey, are you sure you have the right flight?" A prickle of heat went up Elani's neck, but years of training and experience had taught her to compartmentalize that feeling. This was the moment, the data point she was here to collect. She kept her expression neutral. "I believe so," Elani replied. "Flight 11 to Los Angeles. That's what it says on the screen." She gestured to the large monitor above the gate. Karen tapped furiously at her keyboard, the clacking of her acrylic nails a staccato rhythm of irritation. "Well, my system is showing a problem with this seat. It's been flagged." "Flagged for what exactly?" Elani asked. "Security," Karen said vaguely, waving a dismissive hand. "We have to be careful. Sometimes people buy fraudulent tickets or use stolen points." She looked pointedly at Elani, leaving the accusation hanging in the air. The man behind Elani, a businessman in a crisp suit, shifted his weight impatiently. "Can we get a move on?" he grumbled. "I'm handling a situation here, sir." Karen snapped at him before turning her condescending smile back to Elani. "Look, maybe there's been a mix-up. I can put you in a lovely middle seat in the main cabin. We just don't have room for you up front." This was the classic playbook. Create a vague, unsubstantiated problem. Offer a deeply inferior solution. Rely on the passenger's desire to avoid a public scene to force their compliance. Elani knew it well. She had read hundreds of reports detailing this exact scenario. "No, thank you," Elani said, her voice still perfectly level. "I paid for seat 2B, my purchase was confirmed, and the funds have cleared my account. I'd like to understand the specific reason my valid paid-for ticket is not being honored." She was using the language of contract and regulation, not emotion. This seemed to irritate Karen even more. The gate agent's face began to flush a blotchy red. "Ma'am, I don't have time to explain the intricacies of our reservation system to you," Karen said, her voice rising in volume. "The seat is unavailable. We have an air marshal who needs it." It was a bold, foolish lie. Air marshals boarded discreetly, and their presence was never announced by a gate agent. It was a lie so blatant it was insulting. Alani's eyebrows rose slightly. This was better than she could have hoped for. The sheer audacity was a gift. An air marshal, Alani repeated, her calm tone a stark contrast to Karen's agitation. That's interesting. Could you provide me with the specific dot regulation that allows for a confirmed ticketed passenger to be involuntarily downgraded for an air marshal who, to my knowledge, would already be accounted for in the flight manifest? The mention of the Department of Transportation caused a brief flicker of uncertainty in Karen's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by righteous indignation. Who was this woman in a hoodie to quote regulations at her? I don't have to quote anything to you. I am the final authority at this gate. Karen declared, her voice now loud enough to turn heads all around the waiting area. You are holding up the line and disrupting the boarding process. I can have you removed from the flight entirely if you continue to be difficult. I'm not being difficult, Alani stated. I'm asking for clarification. You've given me 3 different reasons for my downgrade: a security flag, a fraudulent ticket, and now an air marshal. Which one is the official reason I will be reporting to American Airlines Corporate and the Department of Transportation? The name-dropping was a calculated risk. It could either shut Karen down or push her over the edge. It was the latter. That's it, I've had enough of your attitude, Karen seethed. You're not getting on this plane in first class, and that's final. Go to the end of the main cabin line, and I'll see if I can find you a seat at all. Now move. She tossed the boarding pass back onto the counter. It slid off and fluttered to the floor. Alani looked down at the paper, then back up at Karen's triumphant, snarling face. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, a pillar of unnerving calm in the eye of a petty hurricane. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable. Passengers shuffled their feet, avoiding eye contact. They just wanted to get on the plane. Are you deaf? Karen spat. I said move. Finally, Alani bent down, retrieved her boarding pass, and stepped aside. But she didn't go to the back of the line. She walked to a nearby bank of chairs, sat down, and took out her phone. Her fingers began to fly across the screen, her expression unreadable. She was no longer just a passenger. She was Dr. Eleni Taylor's senior field auditor for the DOT's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection, and she was documenting every single word. The game had just begun. From her perch in the uncomfortable vinyl seating, Eleni had a clear view of the boarding gate. She typed rapidly, capturing the entire exchange, with Karen Miller in a secure time-stamped note on her government-issued device. She noted Karen's name, the flight number, the gate, the precise time. She documented the 3 contradictory excuses, the aggressive tone, the public humiliation. Every detail was a nail. Meanwhile, Karen Miller was basking in the glow of her perceived victory. She boarded the first-class passengers with an extra-wide smile, her voice once again the syrupy, sweet sound of customer service. She shared a conspiratorial eye roll with a flight attendant about the difficult passenger she had just handled. She was the queen of her small, fluorescent-lit kingdom, and she had successfully repelled an invader. Alani waited. She knew the procedure. A formal complaint required giving the airline every opportunity to rectify the situation at the local level. The failure of the initial employee was one data point. The failure of their supervisor was another, more telling one. It spoke to culture, training, and systemic rot. After the first-class cabin and premium economy passengers had boarded, Karen picked up the microphone for the general boarding call. It was then that a man in a slightly rumpled manager's uniform approached her. This was Robert Vance, the customer service manager on duty. Alani knew his type instantly. The peacemaker. The man whose entire job was to make problems disappear with the least amount of friction, which usually meant siding with his staff and placating disgruntled customers with meaningless gestures. He spoke to Karen in low tones, gesturing vaguely in Alani's direction. Clearly, someone had either complained or he'd noticed the lingering unboarded passenger who didn't appear to be on standby. Karen relayed her version of the story, her hands fluttering with dramatic emphasis. Alani could practically hear the fabricated narrative from across the concourse, the aggressive passenger, the security concerns, her own heroic efforts to maintain order. Robert nodded along, his expression one of tired sympathy for his beleaguered employee. Then he straightened his tie and began the walk over to Alani. He plastered on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Dr. Taylor, he began, glancing at the boarding pass she now held in her hand. I'm Robert Vance, the manager on duty. I understand there was a bit of a misunderstanding regarding your seat. There was no misunderstanding, Mr. Vance, Eleni said, her voice devoid of accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. Your agent, Miss Miller, has refused to honor my first-class ticket. Robert's smile tightened. Well, refused is a strong word. Karen indicated there was a system error, a seat duplication. It's rare, but it happens. We had to accommodate another passenger. It's all very technical. He was already trying to reframe the narrative, smoothing over Karen's abrasive lies with a veneer of corporate jargon. She told me my ticket was flagged for security, that it might be fraudulent, and that the seat was needed for an air marshal. Eleni recited calmly, which of those technical issues is the correct one? Robert visibly flinched. He had clearly not been briefed on the specifics of Karen's lies. He glanced back at the gate, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Karen had made this messy. Right, he said, clearing his throat. Well, sometimes in a rush, things can get miscommunicated. The point is, the seat is unfortunately occupied. What I can do for you as a gesture of our apology for the confusion is offer you a $200 travel voucher for a future flight. And of course, we'll get you on this flight right now. I have a seat for you in the main cabin. He presented the offer as if it were a grand prize, a $200 voucher for a ticket that cost nearly 10 times that in exchange for being publicly humiliated and downgraded. It was the standard corporate insult designed to make the victim feel like they were getting something, while the airline admitted no wrongdoing and saved a fortune. A $200 voucher and a refund for the fare difference, I assume? Eleni asked. The voucher is the compensation for the inconvenience. Robert clarified, his patience thinning. We're getting you to your destination. That's the primary service. The primary service I paid for was transportation to my destination in seat 2B, Eleni countered. So to be clear, American Airlines' official position is that my contract can be unilaterally broken. I can be moved to a vastly inferior product, and my only compensation is a voucher that requires me to spend more money with your airline in the future. Robert's jaw clenched. This woman wasn't backing down. She wasn't getting emotional or angry, which would have been easier to handle. She was being methodical. She was building a case. Look, he said, dropping the pretense of a smile. We're about to close the doors. Do you want to get to Los Angeles or not? I have a middle seat in row 32 for you. That's the offer. Take it or leave it. If you leave it, we can discuss a full refund, but you will not be flying today. It was the final power play, the threat of being left behind. For 99% of travelers, the need to reach their destination would outweigh the principle of the matter. They would take the bad seat fume silently and maybe write an angry email later that would be answered with a form letter and another useless voucher. Eleni held his gaze for a long moment. She saw the complacency in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he held all the cards. He was the system. He was the one who enabled the Karens of the world, who cleaned up their messes, not by correcting them, but by burying the complaints and bullying the victims into submission. I will take the seat, Eleni said quietly. Relief washed over Robert's face. He had won. Excellent, he said, his phony smile returning. Just let me walk you to the gate. We'll get you scanned in. He personally escorted her to the gate, making a show of being helpful. Karen Miller watched them approach, a smirk playing on her lips. She rescanned Eleni's pass, which now flagged her new seat 32E. The dreaded middle seat at the back of the plane near the lavatories. As Eleni walked down the jet bridge, she felt the stares of the other passengers. They had all witnessed the confrontation. Some looked at her with pity, others with annoyance that she had held up the line. None of them knew what was really happening. She found her seat squeezed between the businessman from the line, who was now pointedly ignoring her, and a large man who had already commandeered both armrests. The flight attendant gave her a strained, apologetic smile. As the plane door closed with a final sealing thud, Eleni leaned her head back against the seat. It was uncomfortable. The legroom was non-existent. The smell from the lavatory was already noticeable. It was perfect. She took out her phone again and opened the same secure note. 1455 ET. Manager Robert Vance, refusing fare difference refund, offered $200 voucher as sole compensation. Confirmed official offer is seat 32E or be denied travel. Coerced acceptance under threat of stranding. Systemic failure to address initial agent misconduct confirmed. Report ready for submission upon landing. She closed her eyes. It was going to be a long flight, but the real work was about to begin. The airline thought the problem was over. In reality, it hadn't even started. The 6-hour flight was a study in controlled observation. Alani didn't watch a movie or listen to music. She listened to the cabin. She observed the flight attendants who were professional but harried. She watched them handle a medical issue in row 28 with calm efficiency and deal with an intoxicated passenger in row 15 with firm diplomacy. They were good at their jobs. The problem wasn't with the entire airline. It was with a specific cancerous culture at the gate enabled by indifferent management. This distinction was important. When the plane finally touched down at LAX, the usual scramble to deplane began. Alani waited patiently until the aisle cleared before gathering her single backpack. As she walked through the now empty first-class cabin, she glanced at seat 2B. A young man barely out of his teens and dressed in designer clothes was fast asleep, his mouth agape. He hadn't been an air marshal. He was just a kid whose father probably had millions of airline miles. Alani didn't head for the baggage claim or the exit. She walked directly to the American Airlines Admirals Club. Her first-class ticket, though not honored for the flight, still granted her access. She scanned the original boarding pass at the front desk. The machine beeped green. The irony was not lost on her. She found a quiet, secluded work cubicle in the back of the lounge overlooking the tarmac. She pulled out her laptop connected to the secure government VPN and typed her password. A seal appeared on the screen: United States Department of Transportation. She finalized her report, attaching the audio file from her phone, which had been discreetly recording the entire exchange with both Karen and Robert. The audio was crystal clear. It was irrefutable. She titled the file Field Audit Area 11 JFK LAX 31 GUL 25. Blatant discriminatory practice and regulation violation. Then she made the call. It rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. Cromwell. Director Cromwell, it's Alani Taylor. Alani, you've landed, asked Director Anthony Cromwell, head of the DOT's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection. He was a man who had spent 30 years fighting bureaucracy from the inside, and he valued directness above all else. Landed and documented, sir, she said. The test case at JFK was fruitful. Define fruitful. Cromwell said, a hint of weariness in his voice. He'd seen too many of these reports. Gate agent denied boarding to first class based on what I can only describe as visual prejudice. Alani began, her tone shifting from that of a weary traveler to a clinical investigator. Name is Karen Miller, employee ID 77492. Offered 3 separate contradictory and false reasons for the denial: a security flag ticket fraud and the need to seat an air marshal. There was a pause on the other end of the line. An air marshal. She actually said that out loud. It's on the audio, sir, loud and clear in front of at least a dozen other passengers. Amateur, Cromwell muttered. Did you escalate to a supervisor? As per protocol, manager on duty was Robert Vance. He backed his employee completely, framed it as a system error, refused a fair difference refund, and offered a $200 voucher as total compensation for a $1,600 ticket. His final offer was a middle seat in the rear of the aircraft or be denied travel. Cromwell let out a long, slow breath. Alani could picture him in his Washington, D.C. office, pinching the bridge of his nose. So they ran the entire playbook, from casual racism to corporate stonewalling, all in under 30 minutes. And you have it all recorded. Yes, sir. The report is uploaded to the secure server now. File name is AA11JFK. Good. Cromwell said, his voice now losing its weariness and taking on a hard, sharp edge. This is what we've been waiting for. We've been getting dozens of anecdotal complaints about that specific station, but the evidence has always been circumstantial. They always manage to bury it. But this is a senior federal auditor undercover with clean, undeniable proof. What are the next steps, Director? Alani asked. The next step is that you get yourself a nice hotel order, the most expensive thing on the room service menu, and get a good night's sleep on the taxpayer's dime. You've earned it, Cromwell said. My office takes it from here. I'm looking at your report now. It's pristine. This isn't just a fine, Alani. This isn't a slap on the wrist. This incident has just triggered a full-scale top-to-bottom compliance audit of American Airlines Northeastern operations. Alani felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. This was why she did the job. It wasn't about revenge. It was about this moment. The moment a single, well-documented injustice could be used as a lever to force systemic change. "They're going to fight it," Alani stated. "Let them," Cromwell replied, his voice a low growl. "I'm going to assemble a team. We're flying to their headquarters in Fort Worth, and you're going to be there with us. I want their vice president of operations to look you in the eye when we read him the list of statutes his company has violated. I want him to see the difficult passenger his staff tried to discard." A new energy filled Alani. The exhaustion from the flight evaporated. "When do we leave?" "Day after tomorrow. Be ready. I'm going to make some calls tonight that are going to make a lot of very rich executives very, very unhappy. They thought they were dealing with one passenger. They're about to find out they're dealing with the full weight of the United States government." "Understood, sir," Alani said. And Alani, "Yes, Director." "Good work. Damn good work." The line clicked dead. Alani closed her laptop. She looked out the window at the endless ballet of airplanes taking off and landing. For every flight that operated smoothly, how many small, unreported injustices occurred at the gates? How many people were subtly, or not so subtly, discriminated against and simply gave up, worn down by people like Karen Miller and Robert Vance? Today, that changed. Today, a line had been crossed in front of the wrong person. A reckoning was coming, and it was going to be swift, brutal, and exquisitely public. 2 days later, in the sprawling glass and steel corporate headquarters of American Airlines in Fort Worth, Texas, Richard Sterling, the executive vice president of North American operations, was having a perfectly ordinary morning. He'd had his 8 a.m. coffee with the CFO, reviewed the on-time performance metrics from the previous day, and was now preparing for a budget meeting. He was a man who lived by spreadsheets and data, a world of predictable inputs and manageable outputs. At 9:15 a.m., his administrative assistant, a perpetually flustered young woman named Chloe, buzzed his intercom. Her voice was unusually shaky. "Mr. Sterling, there are some people here to see you. They don't have an appointment." Richard sighed, annoyed at the breach of protocol. "I don't take unscheduled meetings, Chloe. You know that. Get their card and tell them to schedule through you." "Sir?" "I don't think that's going to work," Chloe stammered. "They're from the Department of Transportation, the Office of the Secretary." Richard Sterling's blood ran cold. The Office of the Secretary didn't send people for a casual chat. They sent people when something had gone catastrophically wrong. "How many of them?" he asked, his voice suddenly tight. "4, sir. They have badges. They're asking for you, the head of legal and the VP of Human Resources. They've requested use of the main executive boardroom." They weren't asking. They were informing. "Put them in the boardroom, Chloe," Richard said, his mind racing. What could this be? A safety violation? A major security breach? "Get legal and HR up there now. I'm on my way." He straightened his tie, splashed some cold water on his face in his private washroom, and walked toward the boardroom with a mask of calm authority he did not feel. When he entered, his heart sank. Sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table were 4 figures who looked like they had been carved from granite. 3 men in dark, severe suits and 1 woman. The man in the center, a formidable figure with graying temples and an air of absolute command, was clearly the leader. This was Anthony Cromwell. Richard recognized him from industry conferences, but it was the woman who made Richard's breath catch in his throat. She was dressed in a razor-sharp navy blue pantsuit, her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. Her face was calm, her posture erect. She looked like a high-powered attorney or a senior executive, and she looked vaguely, troublingly familiar. "Mr. Sterling," Cromwell began, his voice filling the cavernous room. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I am Anthony Cromwell, Director of the Office of Aviation Consumer Protection. This is my senior legal counsel and my chief investigator." He then gestured to the woman. "And this is Dr. Alani Taylor, one of our senior field auditors." The name Taylor pinged a faint bell in Richard's memory. An operational flag report had crossed his desk yesterday. A minor customer service issue at JFK handled by the local manager. A passenger had been difficult about a seat downgrade. It was so routine he had barely skimmed it. The report mentioned a Dr. Taylor. Richard's face must have betrayed his dawning horror, because a grim knowing look passed over Cromwell's face. I believe you're familiar with Dr. Taylor's case. Cromwell continued, his voice dripping with ice. Flight 11 from JFK to LAX 2 days ago. She was the passenger your gate agent publicly accused of fraud before illegally downgrading her from a paid first-class seat. Richard Sterling felt like the floor had just dropped out from under him. The minor customer service issue, the difficult passenger, it was a federal auditor, an undercover federal auditor. He looked at Alani, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the unshakable composure. This was not a random disgruntled passenger. This was a professional, and they had walked right into her trap. I was only made aware of a minor seating dispute. Richard stammered, his usual corporate poise deserting him. The VPs of legal and HR, who had just scurried into the room, looked utterly bewildered. A minor seating dispute, Cromwell echoed, his voice laced with contempt. He slid a folder across the table. What you call a minor dispute, Mr. Sterling, the United States government calls a clear and egregious violation of Title 49 of the U.S. Code and 14 CFR Part 382, which explicitly prohibits air carriers from subjecting a person in air transportation to discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, or ancestry. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Richard's. Your gate agent, Karen Miller, made her determination to deny Dr. Taylor her rightful seat based on a prejudiced visual assessment. Your manager, Robert Vance, then attempted to cover up this discriminatory act with corporate-sanctioned bullying tactics. This wasn't a system error, Mr. Sterling. This was a system failure. A failure of training, a failure of oversight, and a failure of culture. Richard was speechless. He opened the folder. Inside was a full transcript of the conversations Alani had recorded. Word for word, lie for lie. Pursuant to our authority, Cromwell said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet, we are hereby notifying American Airlines that we are launching a full-scale emergency audit of your company's compliance with all federal anti-discrimination and consumer protection statutes. This audit will be the most comprehensive in your company's history. He produced a thick document from his briefcase. This is our initial request for documents. We want everything. All customer service training manuals from the last 5 years, all passenger complaints filed nationwide for the last 36 months, categorized by passenger, demographic, nature of complaint, and resolution. The complete personnel files, including all performance reviews and disciplinary actions from Ms. Karen Miller and Mr. Robert Vance. We want logs of all involuntary downgrades at JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark airports for the last 2 years. The deadline for this initial production is 5 business days. Now, Cornwall. The airline's head of legal, a woman named Patricia, let out an audible gasp. The manpower and cost required to comply with such a request would be astronomical. It was designed to be punishing. This is unprecedented, Patricia managed to say. Unprecedented situations call for unprecedented measures. Cromwell shot back. He stood up, as did his team. We will require a dedicated workspace for our audit team of 12 effective Monday morning. We expect your full and immediate cooperation. Any attempt to delay, obstruct, or conceal information will be met with the severest possible penalties, including referral to the Department of Justice. Cromwell paused at the door and looked back not at Richard, but at his entire executive team. You should all understand this clearly, he said. This is no longer about one passenger seat. This is about the fundamental promise you make to the public that every single person who buys a ticket will be treated with dignity and respect regardless of what they look like or how they're dressed. Your airline broke that promise 2 days ago, and now you're going to be held accountable. He and his team walked out, leaving a stunned, profound silence in their wake. Richard Sterling slowly sank into his chair, staring at the transcript on the table. He looked over at Alani's name, and then at the words uttered by his gate agent. First class. Honey, are you sure you have the right flight? Those 9 words, he realized, were about to cost his company millions of dollars, a public relations nightmare of epic proportions, and perhaps his own job. The reckoning had arrived. The week that followed was one of controlled chaos at the American Airlines headquarters. The dedicated workspace Cromwell had demanded became known grimly as the War Room. 12 of the DOT's sharpest auditors, led by Alani Taylor, descended upon the airline like a force of nature. They were polite, professional, and utterly relentless. Mountains of data poured in. Digital files, physical complaint letters, HR records. Alani and her team worked with chilling efficiency using sophisticated data analysis software to sift through the noise and find the patterns. And the patterns were damning. They started with Karen Miller and Robert Vance. Karen's file was a tapestry of red flags. Over 3 years, she had accumulated 14 formal passenger complaints. 9 of those complaints were from passengers with ethnically identifiable last names. All of them involved disputes over seating baggage fees or boarding procedures. And every single one had been investigated and cleared by her supervisor, Robert Vance, with a boilerplate note. Agent followed protocol. Passenger was non-compliant. He hadn't just failed to supervise her. He had actively enabled her. But the individual cases were just the beginning. The macro data told a much bigger story. Alani's team analyzed the 36 months of nationwide complaint data. They found that complaints filed by passengers identified as racial minorities were 40% more likely to be closed with no action or with a low-value voucher under $200 than complaints filed by white passengers for similar issues. They found that involuntary downgrades at the 3 major New York airports disproportionately affected non-white travelers, a statistical anomaly too significant to be chance. The training manuals were just as revealing. The anti-discrimination training was a 15-minute click-through module that employees were required to complete once a year. It was a legal checkbox, not a serious attempt at education. The emphasis was on de-escalation and protecting the airline's assets, not on ensuring fair treatment. On Wednesday, the inevitable happened. Karen Miller and Robert Vance were summoned to Fort Worth. They were ushered into a sterile HR conference room where they came face-to-face not just with the airline's terrified lawyers, but with 2 of Cromwell's investigators. Karen, stripped of the authority of her gate, was a different person. Her arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a sullen, defensive fear. She insisted she had just been following procedure. "Whose procedure, Ms. Miller?" one investigator asked calmly. "The procedure that tells you to accuse a passenger of fraud with no evidence, or the one that tells you to lie about an air marshal needing a seat?" When confronted with the transcript from Alani's recording, Karen's face turned white. She crumpled. "I was stressed," she whimpered. "It was a busy day." She had an attitude. It was a pathetic defense, and everyone in the room knew it. She was fired on the spot for gross misconduct and violations of company policy and federal law. As she was escorted out of the building, her employee badge already deactivated, the reality hit her. It wasn't just a job she had lost. It was her entire career. No other airline would touch her. Robert Vance's meeting was even more brutal. He tried to blame Karen, painting himself as a manager trying to clean up a messy situation. "You didn't clean it up, Mr. Vance." The airline's VP of HR said, her voice like steel. "You buried it, just like you buried the 9 other formal complaints against her from minority passengers. You didn't just fail to manage. You cultivated a toxic and legally liable environment. You are a multi-million-dollar liability we can no longer afford." His termination was for cause gross negligence. He tried to argue to plead, but the evidence was overwhelming. He walked out of the building a defeated man. His 2 decades in the aviation industry turned to ash because he couldn't be bothered to do his job. Late Friday afternoon, Richard Sterling received the preliminary audit findings report. It was 40 pages long and read like a corporate death sentence. It detailed not just the actions of Miller and Vance, but the systemic patterns of bias the audit had uncovered. Attached to it was a draft of the consent decree the DOT was proposing. It was breathtaking in its scope. 1, a civil penalty of $5.5 million, the largest fine ever levied for a single discriminatory incident in aviation history, citing the egregious nature of the event and the subsequent discovery of systemic issues. 2, a complete overhaul of training. The airline would be required to hire a DOT-approved third-party consultant to design and implement a new comprehensive anti-bias and customer service training program for all 67,000 of its customer-facing employees. The program would be paid for entirely by the airline. 3. Appointment of a federal monitor. For a period of 3 years, a federal monitor also paid for by the airline would be embedded within their corporate structure with full access to systems and personnel to ensure compliance with the decree. 4. Enhanced complaint tracking. The airline had to invest in new software to track and analyze passenger complaints, flagging statistical disparities based on demographics for immediate review by a new internal compliance committee. 5. A public apology. The CEO of American Airlines would be required to issue a formal public apology to Dr. Alan Taylor and to the American public acknowledging the company's failings. Richard Sterling read the terms and felt sick. Fighting this in court would be a disaster. The audio recording alone would crucify them in the court of public opinion. They had no choice but to capitulate. He picked up the phone to call the CEO. The company had tried to get rid of one woman, and now that one woman was about to dictate the terms of their surrender. The quiet, unassuming passenger in the black hoodie had brought an industry giant to its knees, not with anger or shouting, but with calm, meticulous, and undeniable truth. The reckoning was not just complete, it was absolute. The consent decree was signed in a sterile quiet, a document of surrender passed across the mahogany table with the gravity of a peace treaty ending a war. But in the world outside the executive suite, the war was just beginning. The Department of Transportation, as part of its strategy to maximize the deterrent effect, issued a press release at 9 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, August 11th, 2025. It was a bombshell. The news cycle, hungry for outrage, devoured it whole. It led every major network's morning broadcast. A record $5. Auditor, under $5 million fine levied against American Airlines, announced a stern-faced anchor on CNN following a DOT investigation that uncovered systemic discriminatory practices sparked by a single shocking incident at JFK Airport. The story had everything a villain in the form of a gate agent dubbed Gatekeeper Karen by the internet, a hero in the form of the unnamed black woman who turned out to be a federal auditor, and a corporate giant brought to its knees. The audio clip of Karen Miller's voice released by the DOT went viral. "First class, honey, are you sure you have the right flight?" The 9 words became a meme, a TikTok sound, a symbol of casual, everyday racism, weaponized by petty authority. The airline's stock, which had been trading steadily, plummeted by 9% in the first 2 hours of trading, wiping out over $1 billion in market capitalization. Boycott American trended worldwide on X, formerly Twitter. The story was no longer about a legal settlement. It had become a cultural moment, a public trial on the grandest scale. For Gregory Finch, the silver-haired, immaculately tailored CEO of American Airlines, it was the worst day of his professional life. He stood on a small stage in a cavernous hangar at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, facing a wall of cameras. His public relations team had advised a controlled environment, but it felt more like an execution. The teleprompter held the words his legal team had spent 48 agonizing hours crafting, but they felt like ashes in his mouth. "Good morning," he began, his voice strained. "On behalf of the entire American Airlines family, I want to issue a formal and unreserved apology." He spoke of the airline's commitment to diversity and inclusion of the millions of passengers they serve with pride every year. It was standard corporate boilerplate, and it was falling flat. However, he continued, reaching the part of the speech that mattered. "It is clear that in a recent, well-publicized incident, we failed. We failed one of our customers, and in doing so, we failed to live up to our own values and the trust you place in us every time you choose to fly with us." He then had to perform the most humiliating act of all. "To Dr. Alani Taylor, I offer my most sincere and personal apology. The treatment she received from our employees was unacceptable, unprofessional, and contrary to everything we stand for. There is no excuse for it." He announced the immediate termination of the employees involved and detailed in broad strokes the sweeping changes mandated by the consent decree, the new training, the federal oversight. He looked into the camera, trying to project sincerity. "We are committed to learning from this failure and to ensuring that every single passenger who steps into one of our airports is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. We will do better." The cameras flashed a blinding storm of light. The apology was delivered. But no one, least of all Gregory Finch, believed it would be enough to quell the firestorm. Hundreds of miles away in a nondescript Marriott hotel room in Austin, Texas, a young graphic design student named Leo watched the CEO's apology on his laptop. He had been on Flight 11 that day, returning from visiting his family in New York. He was standing a few people behind Alani in the boarding line. He had seen it all. He remembered the woman in the simple black hoodie, her incredible, unnerving calm. He remembered the gate agent's snarling face, the way she had tossed the boarding pass to the floor. He remembered feeling a knot of shame in his stomach, a cowardly urge to say something that he had ultimately suppressed, not wanting to miss his flight or cause a bigger scene. That shame had been eating at him for over a week. Now, seeing the story explode, he knew he couldn't stay silent. He opened a new tab and began to type a post for Reddit's public freakout forum. Title: I was there. I saw gatekeeper Karen and the undercover auditor at JFK. I haven't been able to stop thinking about this since I saw it on the news, he wrote. I was on AA Flight 11 when this happened. I was in the boarding line right behind the woman the news is calling a hero auditor. The audio clip doesn't do it justice. The gate agent wasn't just rude, she was dripping with contempt from the second she saw her. The woman in the hoodie, Dr. Taylor, I guess, was so incredibly calm. She never raised her voice. She just asked simple, direct questions, and the agent just got angrier and angrier. The worst part was the supervisor. He wasn't loud or aggressive, he was worse. He was slick. He smiled this fake smile and tried to make it seem like she was the one being unreasonable. I heard him tell her to take the middle seat in the back, or she wouldn't be flying at all. All of us just stood there and let it happen. We just wanted to get on the plane. Seeing the CEO apologize today felt weird. I'm glad she got justice, but I also feel guilty that none of us had the guts to back her up. It just goes to show how easy it is for this stuff to happen when good people decide to look away. For what it's worth, Dr. Taylor, if you ever read this, what you did was amazing. You were the calmest, strongest person in that whole airport. He hit post. Within an hour, it had 1,000 upvotes. By the end of the day, it was on the front page of Reddit with over 100,000 upvotes and had been picked up by news aggregators. Leo's first-hand account added a powerful humanizing layer to the official story, and his confession of bystander inaction resonated with millions. In her own hotel room in Fort Worth, preparing to fly home to Washington, D.C., Alani Taylor watched the same apology. She sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, her work suit now replaced by another set of comfortable travel clothes. She felt no sense of triumph, no thrill of victory. She simply felt a profound weariness and a quiet, steely resolve. She had read Leo's Reddit post sent to her by a colleague. It touched her more than the CEO's apology ever could. The apology was a corporate necessity, a financial calculation. The student's post was a genuine human reaction. It spoke to the heart of the problem, the small, silent failures of courage that allow injustice to fester. Her phone buzzed. It was Director Cromwell. "Did you see it?" he asked, no preamble needed. "I saw it," Alani replied. $1 billion in market value, Alani." Cromwell said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "That's a message even a board of directors can understand. They'll be teaching this case study in business schools for the next 20 years. "Is it over?" she asked. "For them, the hard part is just beginning. For us—" "Well, the work is never over," he said. "Take a few days off. You've earned it. But I'm looking at a preliminary report from our office in Chicago. Another airline. A pattern of complaints from passengers requiring wheelchairs who claim they are being boarded last and their equipment is being intentionally mishandled. It smells rotten." Alani closed her eyes. It never ended. A victory in one battle simply meant the war moved to a new front. From race to disability, the mechanisms of disregard were often the same. "When do you need me?" she asked. "Enjoy your weekend, Dr. Taylor," Cromwell said warmly. "I'll send you the preliminary file on Monday. We need someone to go and book a ticket and see for themselves." "Understood, Director," she said, and hung up. Alani stood and walked to the window, looking out over the landscape of a city she had inadvertently thrown into chaos. She thought of Karen Miller and Robert Vance, their careers in ruins. She didn't rejoice in their downfall. They were not masterminds. They were products of a system that rewarded complacency and punished difference. Her goal had been to break that system, and the human cost, while necessary, was still a heavy burden. She picked up her simple black backpack, the same one she had carried onto Flight 11. It was time to go home. But as she walked out of the room, she knew that soon enough she would be back in another airport, in another unassuming outfit, becoming another invisible data point. She would be watching, listening, and waiting for that moment of truth, a quiet warrior in a never-ending fight, for the simple, radical idea that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. The story of Dr. Alani Taylor isn't just about a single incident on a single flight. It's a powerful reminder that systems are made of people, and true change often starts when one person refuses to accept injustice. The actions of the gate agent and her supervisor weren't just rude. They were a symptom of a deeper cultural problem, one that the Department of Transportation was able to expose, thanks to the courage and professionalism of an undercover auditor. The consequences were severe, massive fines, firings, and a complete federally mandated overhaul of the airline's training and procedures. It's a stark illustration that accountability, when it finally arrives, can be devastating. What do you think? Was this a justified response or an overreach of government power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of justice and accountability.